find an accelerator and join it and learn how to do it. You know, business is just as hard as science. Learn how to do it properly. And you could be working on your project alongside, but don't even come to me if you don't have some kind of training in entrepreneurialism, because you know what? It's an art form that's practiced beautifully by the people that learn it. So get back to school.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Howard Urnovitz. And Howard started his journey in high school. His mother ended up getting cancer, and he promised her that he would find a cure. And then when he went off to college and got a master's and a PhD in microbiology, and then went to San Francisco and worked in the medical industry, created I think a urine test for HIV. That company went public, and then moved over and started another company. I did that for a period of time before starting the current company during COVID, and got some business funding and built it from there. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Howard.
Thank you so much, Devin, for having me.
Absolutely excited to have you here. So I just gave a quick overview to a much longer journey. So why don't we rewind and unpack that a little bit and tell us a little bit about how your journey got started in high school.
Great. Thank you so much. You're not going to believe this journey, but it started with the Bible. It started with the Bible because, just to let your audience know, I'm a proud Reformed Jew. And the definition of Reformed Judaism is, it started in 1871 in Germany, was that the group there wanted to keep all the valuable traditions of Judaism. But if you wanted to believe in God, that was just an option for you. So that's how I started my journey. So imagine a kid like me having the good fortune of meeting Mr. Levbarg as a Sunday school teacher, the head of all public schools in Detroit. And he sat me down and said, I can't tell at this time, you're in high school, can't tell if God's ever going to be part of your life, but you are one smart kid and we need you to win the Bible contest. So Devin, that's when I learned what a spreadsheet was. We set out a spreadsheet. It was Genesis. We put all the tribes in, the Moabs, the Philistines, blah, blah, blah. And then the next column was why we hated them. And I basically built this nice spreadsheet that ended up winning me 7th out of 200,000 people in the international conference. And that's when I got my love for religious history. And so carrying on with that meme, my journey started because of that fantastic holiday called Hanukkah. And you get all your presents from everybody gets gifts that time of year. But what's interesting is my mom used it as a way of finding out what are her kids interested in. And she did. So unfortunately, the first Hanukkah present I got was a chemistry set. And so I built a laboratory in the basement and working away. And then when things got quiet, my mother always gets nervous. So she opened up the door to the basement and out shot a flamethrower, flame that shot about, I don't know, a good 30 feet, missed her, which is good. And so that was the end of my chemistry career. So next Hanukkah was the big one. I got a microscope. And I will tell you right now, I'm having chills even telling you about the first time I put an onion skin under a microscope and realized, oh my goodness, we're made up of little things called cells. That was the Hanukkah I'll never forget. That's when I became a microbiologist. And so that was it. So in high school, 1969, mom walked in and said she had a lump on her breast, and it turned out it was breast cancer, and that's where the terrible journey started. And so the first year, it was palliative care and everything was fine. Then came June 1971, and I had a decision to make that actually I had no choice, is I wanted to start college immediately. I wanted to find out what is this thing called cancer and what can I do? And so I enrolled at really the only college on the planet, which is the University of Michigan. And so that was the only one I applied to. I got in and I said, why wait? Let's start 3 days after high school. So mom said, go out there and learn as much as you can, gave me the car and drove out to Wyoming, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in the middle of the Rocky Mountains and the Tetons. You're a kid from downtown Detroit in the mountains of Wyoming, big influence. So it was a fantastic course. You're one-on-one with the professors. You're learning about geology. You're learning about all these fantastic things. Then we were all working on our assignments for the next day in our little cabins, and a knock on the door. Howard, you have a call at the main office. I go there, it's night, and it's my family calling and say, we just want to call and tell you, we think everything's going to be fine, but your mom had the doctor screwed up and they collapsed her lung. I said, well, how serious is it? Well, we'll know tomorrow. I said, well, I'm coming back tonight. And they said, we were given specific orders, do not move. So, Devin, that's when I walked outside and I looked up at the most beautiful sky that Wyoming could provide in the Tetons, far away from light. And I could see things with a telescope, the Milky Way, the constellations, everything that was there. And it was that moment when I channeled Mr. Levbarg and said, you know what? This is all wrong. I think everybody has lied to me except for Mr. Levbarg. And that was the moment I opted out to believe in God, because this can't help into somebody as marvelous a person as my mother without some reason. So that's what started my journey, was out there in a class learning. And the very next day I took my pick, I hit that rock, and out fell a fossil, the arch nemesis of all religious doctrine. And that's when I realized, oh my God, this is fantastic. The origins of life and everything is really what I want to dedicate my life to. So that's what happened out in that little town of Jackson Hole, Camp Davis, University of Michigan. So I got back to Detroit to see my mom. She did recover. And then I started my journey in the dorm freshman year at the University of Michigan. And a very fine senior came up to me and said, I've seen your portfolio, and may I make the following suggestion? Why are you wasting your time taking undergraduate classes? Take graduate level classes. Why? It's half the cost because you're an undergrad, so you save money there, and you get to where you want to go as a scientist trying to cure cancer. Best advice I ever had. I didn't take an undergraduate class at that point. So I got into the honors college, and the next thing I knew was I was looking around for somebody who was working on cancer, and that was Bill Murphy, the greatest scientist I could have ever interacted with. And Bill had shown that viruses do not work alone. He published that in Nature 1979 to a big, tremendous thud, nothing. And so one person noticed that, and that was me. So during those years, I worked on the role of retroviruses in cancer. I got my PhD and off to St. Louis. And so in Michigan, Bill Murphy taught me the scientific method. He sat me down and he taught me that a hypothesis, you read all the literature, you test it, and if the results don't match your hypothesis, you need to update the hypothesis. Great. Then I go down to St. Louis, WashU, meet with Dr. Richard Lynch, and work for Dr. Richard Lynch. Why? He was the most creative person I've ever met. And so he followed the scientific method, but he created very creative hypotheses that would really tell the tale. So that was fantastic. Richard then got the appointment of chairman of the University of Iowa. We moved up there and we did great things. We went to Japan together for an international immunology meeting, and that's when I met the great Nobel Prize laureate, George Kohler, who founded what's called hybridomas. What does that mean? He started the revolution for us to make cancer antibodies, anti-cancer antibodies. And so I got to meet him. I got to talk with him. I got a great picture with him. And he sent me his cell lines, and I did the first antibody making cell lines in the Americas. In fact, I even went and did it in space with NASA. And so that was really the journey. And I got to meet Dick Lynch. Well, guess what happens? After all that, and I did point out, I did miss one little thing that had happened to me in high school. Was when I'm applying for only one college. If I don't get in, I'll just move to Ann Arbor and get football tickets. And but what I wanted to do was, get there. And in May 4th, 1970 was when I developed my healthy disregard for all things governmental, because Nixon shot 4 college students for peaceful protesting. Wow, I knew that my journey was going to be difficult. And so that was it. All right, so then after WashU, did a film on how to make monoclonal antibodies, and the biotechnology revolution happened in San Francisco. And so because of my fame on doing monoclonal antibodies, I was hired by a company to start making anti-cancer antibodies. Well, unfortunately, that company was a resume stain, so I shall not mention anything about it. But what it did do was get me to San Francisco in the early 80s. And so it was a startup company. So for all your listeners of startup companies, be prepared to have an office in the women's bathroom. And so thank God it was in the women's bathroom, because it would have not got me from my desk to get up so somebody can use the facility and watch what was happening on the elevator. One after another of young men, 20s, with this big blotch of Kaposi sarcoma cancer on their head. And they're going down to the dermatology clinic. That was the moment, the light bulb. When I asked somebody, what the hell is that? I said, haven't you heard? There's an epidemic of cancer in San Francisco, which would then be known as AIDS. And so that was the moment when I said, I'm wasting my time on this company. AIDS will be the answer to the cure for cancer. So I was able to join a company. I was the first to make a panel of antibodies to HIV, which led to a 10-minute test kit for AIDS in a doctor's office, which was revolutionary, and the FDA approved it. And so that was when I got bit. So the next thing was I got to meet the gentleman who discovered AIDS and published the first peer-reviewed paper in the Lancet, and his name was Professor Elvin Friedman Keene, a genius, past president of dermatology, and became close friends. And so he told me about the fact that they found antibodies in urine to HIV, but it wasn't very sensitive. Could I build that test? And I said, of course I can. So the first person I called after I met the person who discovered AIDS was the person who discovered the virus, Luc Montagnier of the Pasteur Institute, who went on to get the Nobel Prize properly with his co-discoverer, Francois. And so I invited him to San Francisco, and that was a 40-year, very close relationship with the only person, plus Peter Duisberg, who understand how AIDS worked. So that was fantastic. So we raised the money, we put together everything we needed to do, and then we moved on. And so I raised my first venture capital. Those were the days where you had an idea, they threw money at you. Terrible concept. They should have taught us how to do business, and I'll address that at the end of this podcast. I got the money. We did it. We absolutely showed that it works, and in doing so, we encountered a lot of problems with Health and Human Services. And I'm going to bottom line it. And I'm sorry, this is a lot of tough love, but these are startup guys. You have to encounter this stuff. That's when I realized how corrupt Health and Human Services was. NIH, FDA, CDC, pure corruption. And so when I went to do my urine test, which should have been 2,000 patients, they made it 26,000 patients and held up the application for 3 years. You know why? Because they didn't get a royalty on my urine test when they bamboozled France into handing over the royalties from the blood test, even though they didn't discover AIDS. They didn't get the urine test rights because it was never contemplated. So here I am arguing royalties with the FDA while they're holding up the application. And in the meanwhile, we discovered natural immunity to HIV. We published it in Lancet, and we found out that there is a way to cure AIDS. All right, so may I, at this point, answer your question that I will answer at the end. What did I do wrong that I should never do again? And the answer is the media and press are not your friends. They're there for their reason, not for yours. So I thought it was a big deal that I could rally people around us to help us cure AIDS. But in fact, what happened was they went right to the wrong person, and he immediately shut down the program, held up the facilities for 3 years, and that was that. And you can go on LinkedIn and find out who that little twerp was. But that said, we got it done. And let me give you an advice to your. So step one, don't go to the press for brand awareness. Use the tools today of YouTube, LinkedIn, everything, because that way you control the message. That's my strongest point. All right, so entrepreneurs, how did I solve this problem? We hired an ex-commissioner of the FDA on our board of directors. He flew to meet with Kessler to tell him the scandal that was going on in his department, and we got it 6 months later, the approval. That's the dirty tricks you have to do to beat a government of dummy doctors. All right, moving on. So if anything, the fact is that while I couldn't get anywhere in the United States, my research didn't go unnoticed. And Germany, especially the University of Göttingen, reached out to me and said, would you give us a lecture? We have a mad cow problem. So it was back in 2001. So I came there and I figured, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to present my unified field theory for chronic diseases, and that is ancestral genes. So I figured they'll reject it. So I get back the travel plans and everything else, and I said, did you read the title? Oh, it's great. We love this title. Are you sure? So I went there, and they said, we love this. Here's money. Here's a laboratory. Start working on mad cow disease. So I finally got to the place I wanted, and Devin and the audience, my rented apartment was across the street from the origins of the scientific method and the Age of Enlightenment. What is this building? It's called a library. And it's a library that was built in 1737 and the greatest library on earth. Why? Because you could go to it and browse the aisles by subject. It was the first browser. So from there, we basically put together a blood test for mad cow disease, which went away. And we basically floundered because the biggest mistake we made, and this is going to be the positive thing, so I'll say it now and I'll say it at the end of the podcast. If you want to be an entrepreneur, go to school and learn how to be an entrepreneur. Don't fake it until you make it. And so that's exactly what happened after that company was sold for its intellectual property, which wasn't that very good anyway. And the real reason was I lost sight of the fact that I had to spend my old time as a CEO, that I delegated the product development, let's just say, to somebody that was all hat, no cattle. So the next thing I did was I said, all right, this is nonsense. I'm not curing cancer, but I did want to learn one very valuable thing. If you want to cure cancer, you got to study it without cancer. How can I go in the blood of somebody and say which gene is from the cancer cell and which gene is from the normal cells? So that's when I said I went back to school. I met a guy named Paul Heath. He's the hero here. He's Small Business Development Corporation. He heard my story and said, let's enroll you in the John Papa John Entrepreneurial Center, and let's teach you about business canvas models. Let's teach you about customer discovery. Well, where's all this stuff coming from? So that's what we did. And after a little bit of customer discovery, we found out that neurologists need to get the spinal tap replaced with something that isn't painful, that it has higher accuracy than 70%, and is easy to administer. So I said, that's where we'll start. So that was it. Your folks that listen to this podcast, if you don't learn how to do customer discovery and business canvas modeling and all the other things come along, you're wasting everybody's time. So that was the moment, and that's when we started out. So
maybe just to dive in, just because as we kind of continue down the path, we're already bumping up against towards the end of the podcast. Want to make sure we have a bit of time to catch up to where you're at today. So maybe in a bit of a fast forward fashion, kind of walk us through as you've gone through doing a lot of those, you kind of figuring out, going down the path, learning with the FDA, learning kind of the areas to focus on. How did that evolve to kind of the business where you're at today?
So here's where we are today. We build it, they buy it. I am not going to waste my time on sales, marketing, regulatory, and everything else. My last company got bought for the intellectual property, which was pretty much worthless. But this one can generate billions of dollars a year because it picks up all the neurologic diseases. It will pick up all the cancers, which we'll put in our patent. So to summarize, Devin, when you go to school for $2 million, I finished the human genome. I finished all the genomes. I came up with a test that can detect Parkinson's disease in people that got COVID so that we can cure them and they never get it. And I'm going to sell this company starting price of $10 billion. That's what it means to go to school and understand what your value is in the supply chain. And ours is just to build a model and sell it to big box companies that can really do a great job to get out there and do it. That's my story.
No, that's awesome. Sounds like it's been quite a great story and a good evolution along the way. Now, kind of just as you said, as you started to touch on, but maybe just for the audience, kind of what, or just give everybody a quick reminder, kind of say, what is the focus of the business overall today? And if you're to say kind of, to tag onto that, looking at the next 6 to 12 months, kind of where do you see things headed?
Yeah. So our intellectual property will be for all chronic diseases and people that are susceptible to viral infections. Our product is focused on neurology, but the reason why we want a big value is, even though our focus is on neurology, we want to make sure that we've built a chronic test for all human diseases, all veterinary diseases, everything. So imagine putting together a patent. I can hear my mom smiling in heaven right now, and I'm a devout atheist, is imagine putting together a patent that covers every ailment that every form of life has. And that will be filed on December 23rd of this year. We've already got the provisional, so we got a proprietary date. And then in January, we start looking for somebody to buy us. That's what we want to happen. So we'll have sales, we'll have intellectual property, and we'll show utility. That's the three things we want to focus on to get somebody to buy us and run with it.
Awesome. Well, sounds like it's going to be an exciting towards the end of this year, as well as an exciting year to come, and some great opportunities yet to come in the future. So sounds like a fun place to be, and will definitely be great to watch. So, well, now as we've kind of touched on where the journey's at today and where things are headed, and you already kind of touched on the question I always like to ask at the end, but we're going to hit on that anyway. So maybe we'll refresh it, or you can expand on it a little bit. But as we jump to the questions I like to ask at the end of the episode, first question I like to ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what'd you learn from it?
Yeah. So the worst decision I made was I used the wrong venue for brand awareness. And brand awareness in science is everything. Look at Theranos and the scandal with Theranos. There was no science at all. And here I'm telling you, I'm building a test for all diseases. Kind of a bold statement. But what we've done is we've used YouTube and not media to get our brand awareness out. That's what I corrected, and I'll never go back and do it again. I don't see myself ever giving an interview to mainstream journalism.
Fair enough. Well, sounds like a good thing to learn from, and it's definitely something to apply to the future. So Now I'm going to ask the second question I like to ask, which is, so now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you give them?
Find an accelerator and join it and learn how to do it. You know, business is just as hard as science. Learn how to do it properly. And you could be working on your project alongside, but don't even come to me if you don't have some kind of training in entrepreneurialism, because you know what? It's an art form that's practiced beautifully by the people that learn it. So get back to school.
Awesome. Well, I think that's definitely another great piece of advice and a great takeaway. So, well, now as we are wrapping up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Go to our website, fbbbio.com, and hit info, contact us, and send me an email. And we will act on it immediately. Our website has been reorganized by our co-founder, Julian Ray, who's big data guy, and we're very proud of it. We've built all of this for you to do your due diligence on us, because quite frankly, this is kind of really outrageous what we're claiming. But when you look at what we did and what we discovered, it's time to start curing people. So get in touch with us, partnerships, investors. Right now, we're focused on functional medicine clinics because we have a research use only test that you can take, and we're going to use that to generate data. So contact us if you like what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, support a great business, make a new connection. If nothing else, make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveunicorn.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review. Helps us to reach even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And along that journey, if you ever need help with patents or trademarks or anything else, your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you, and thank you for providing this platform. It's really valuable.